Hello, friends and family, and welcome to another episode of the Saturday Morning Coffee and Conversation here at the If You Could See Me Project. I am your anxious host, Erin Mahone, here trying to make sense of the dumpster fire that is the world every single day. And today I am joined by my old friend who I haven't talked to in a very, very long time. This is how I talk to my friends now. Daniel Goldschmidt, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for
And that
being
sounds about
here.
right. In 2022, the way we make plans with friends is by doing a podcast.
That's right. I miss you. Will you please come on my podcast so we can catch up?
Yeah.
That's how things are. So how are things in your neck of the woods? You are in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We met in Richmond, Virginia. You live there. I live in the Pacific Northwest now. We are national travelers. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me individually, life is really good. I'm as a music therapist, basically since we last saw each other, I left Richmond to do my master's in Colorado in music therapy. The master's was fine, but I did a certificate in gender, power, and difference with a focus on white supremacy in music therapy, and that kind of gave me, a lot of knowledge and tools and language around equity and around race and around things like that. So that really affected how I move through the world and how I practice as a music therapist, as well as the things I talk about publicly. And so I've done, some keynotes and workshops on white supremacy in healthcare, and I've led a bunch of book clubs and, things like that, because I feel like that's the 10-week model is better than a keynote when it comes to actually changing hearts and minds. And also along this time, I came out as non-binary a year and a half ago. And I also, not long before that, moved to my current neighborhood, Powderhorn in South Minneapolis, and I live 2 blocks from George Floyd Square. So I've, gone to a bunch of meetings there. I've tried to be more involved in things like that. And I'm privileged to be in a community that came together over such tragedy that I get to benefit from the connections that people made from that. As we know, as Jews, a lot of community comes from shared pain, a lot of things that bring us together. And so I absolutely love my neighbors. I feel more connected to the people around me than at any point in my life. And especially, coming through the pandemic where so much of our social connection was online, I came to realize that Twitter and Facebook and FaceTime and all these things, while lovely ways to stay connected to people, are they are to human connection what drugs are to dopamine and serotonin and things like that. We can get access to these, neurotransmitters. They can fill the receptors in our brain, but in the end, it's not the same thing. And the thing that truly fills me is being around people I love and who love me, even if we're not tight, even if we're not best friends. But the other night I walked to a restaurant 6 blocks away from me. It's one of my favorite vegan restaurants in the world, and it's within walking distance. It's very dangerous. And
at least it's vegan.
And I was walking there with my dog, and I'm like, oh, I can't bring my dog in. I'm like, I have a 75% certainty that I'm going to run into someone I know and like at this place. I always do. Sure enough, I get there. It's this guy I know who's a musician and all this. I'm like, hey, can you watch my dog? He's like, sure. I go get my beignets because I got dessert and a beer, and I went out to eat it. And he's like, oh, we're having band rehearsal in the basement if you want to come join in. And so then I played music with people for 2 hours, and it was just a night I walked my dog out and had no plans. And that's just the neighborhood I live in. And it's so I've come to realize in these last couple of years that happiness to me and joy and humanity are authenticity and community. Those 2 buckets are where my grounding comes from and my joy. And so, so that's kind of the miniature version of my journey since we last connected.
Authenticity and community.
All paths. Even when it comes to questions about, when I'm doing the whiteness groups, people were like, well, is it okay for this? Or how do I do this? Whatever. I'm like, it all comes down to authenticity and community. If you're yelling at people on the internet, that's not either. Criticism and love are a Venn diagram, and so are we feeling authentic? Are we feeling like we're building community, or are we just trying to perform something?
And what is the response when you say that to a person?
Luckily, people, I very much prefer doing educational things with people who select to be there. So usually they're down with that line of questioning and think about it. But I think a lot of people connect with that idea because I sincerely believe we all desire to be authentic. That's why people, I mean, I have someone I love very much who is navigating being authentic in their sexuality. And that means the end of a long-term loving relationship they had. And all the dominoes that go with that. And, but at no point have they thought or said to me, like, I wish I hadn't been authentic in my identity.
Right.
You know, it's painful and there's a lot of things to navigate, but I sincerely believe that authenticity is kind of at the core. And so much of white supremacy and patriarchy and all these various systems of domination in the world lead to us not being authentic.
Right. They're intended to dampen the individual, you know, identity.
Absolutely.
We do it here in our very own, you know, specific way, in our, you know, it's not my job to stay quiet so you can stay comfortable kind of way, you know, in this very sort of challenging, like, this is why we invite people to tell their stories and to tell the stories that very frequently, you know, almost completely are the stories that they've been told make people uncomfortable, or you shouldn't talk about that, or, you know, why are you talking about that here, or why are you crying, or why are you, you know, why are you being so much or taking up so much space in our world with this, whatever this experience is. And so, you know, we go through all of this training in our, you know, largely in our early lives that says this is how you will be lovable. Right? This is how you will be palatable for the world. And that is, you know, if you fit into this very tiny little box and you follow the cardinal unspoken rule of not making other people feel weird.
Yeah. You know, that makes me think of, I was working with an adolescent mental health program last year, and kind of one of the straws that broke the camel's back for me was, you know, a lot of talking about mental health with young people and people of all ages is about learning not to take care of other people's feelings, right? It's learning to be responsible for your own and and figuring out, you know, how to get support you need, but in ways that are, you know, this and that, and not taking care of other people's feelings, except when it's conflict resolution. They were watching this video of conflict resolution. It's like, make sure you don't do this. Make sure you say it this way. Make sure you do this before. And I'm like, and so after the video, I said to the group of kids, and it was kids from various backgrounds, and I said, just so you know, if your family handles conflict in a different way than this, that's not inherently wrong. This comes from a very white and Christian set of rules when it comes to conflict, which, if you're going to be going to college, if you're going to be in the American workforce, are very good skills to know, but aren't inherently correct, aren't inherently right. And this coworker who had done that group basically reported me to my boss, saying I called her white supremacist, and it was just like... And it was a whole thing. And I was like, he was like, don't do that in front of the kids. I'm like, do what? I was trying to protect them from white supremacy, you know, like, and we're doing it in these mental health spaces, you know, and I'm like, and so much, even like mentioning, like learning about race, learning about whiteness, learning about my internalized racism, things like that has completely been concurrent with my mental health journey of like working through the bullshit from my master's. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Okay, great. I figured, but just want to double check.
Can't live in a world where I can't live in a world where I don't swear.
Yeah. Like, I mean, but even that censorship, who is censorship for? When we look at all these, like in music therapy, it's a big deal about the songs we use with young people, especially. Well, this one is violence, drugs, sex, rock and roll, whatever. And it's like, who's censorship for? Is it for these children? Because I don't think it is. I don't think it's for their safety.
Very much not, because I find that connection is deepened so significantly when I, you know, invite that into, you know, communicating with young people.
Authenticity.
Like, this is a space where if fuck is what you need to say, fucking say it. Don't cuss at people. You know, let's not do that necessarily, but, you know, like, let's be real about what we're feeling and what we're thinking. And I'm not going to be the space where I say you can't be who you are. I mean, they navigate the world where everything is swearing and all the things that fall into that. And so to walk into this space that says we're here to help you learn how to develop these tools and these skills to navigate the world, why would that not be part of it?
Yeah. And why wouldn't we navigate those things, the sex, the drugs, the violence, things like that, the content, when there's a trained adult in the room, versus when kids are going to talk about it anyway, teens are going to talk about it anyway.
Exactly.
And vastly, and there's so much research, especially about young men and learning domination and sex, like that, that part of dating, part of attracting a mate is to dominate, is to be afraid of same-sex desire, is to be afraid of trans people, and how that training happens laterally and happens in all these different ways. And I remember doing a music therapy group when I lived in Virginia, where, I was with a bunch of young men in a residential program, and they were calling each other bitch. Oh, well, bitch this, bitch that. And I said, what's that word mean? Like, what's it actually mean? And so we went on the board, and I was like, let's think of all the derogatory terms for women. Like, let's just make a list. And they were so excited to be able to say these words, which is a whole nother thing. But so we list, 15, 20 words that are derogatory for women. And I'm like, all right, now derogatory terms specifically for men. And they came up with like one. I'm like, what's that mean? What's it mean when you use these terms for each other? And it became, and I saw their wheels turning. A lot of times when you try and talk about this type of stuff, they're like, okay, whatever. But like that one, I saw their wheels turning, like, huh? And I was like, yes. Like, planned as be. But it became, instead of saying, oh, we don't use those words, it became a conversation what do these mean?
Exactly.
And leaning into it in a smart, methodological
teaching
way.
them to use their thought, their ability for critical thinking. Why do I do this? Where does this come from?
Yeah. And I just released a podcast with my best friend called Music Therapy Think Tank, where I did an episode on sex and basically how about music therapists need to stop being scared of the topic of sex and desire, because 80%, 90% of music is about sex and desire. And so if we're using these songs, let's lean in and actually be a support. Doesn't mean we all have to be sex educators tomorrow, but saying we're just not going there is harmful. It's harmful.
Do you find that a lot in music therapy?
Oh gosh, music therapy is a bastion of white Christian womanhood. Love them dearly. And a lot of people are working on it, but like so many healthcare fields, like so many fields right now, there's a big, reckoning of, music therapy is the marriage of psychology, a very white and patriarchal field, and classical music, a very white and patriarchal field, put them together. And then, so there are definitely a lot of badasses out there changing things up, changing how education is working and things like that. And vastly, the people who run the show are still, people who were raised in that, it's a mix of that white womanhood under the umbrella of trying to be white men, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. And so, and so the American Music Therapy Association is 80% folded as of a month or two ago, because they had to fire all these people, and they're just with the dregs, and we don't know what the future of the organization is. And part of that was people stopped being members because we kept saying, here's what we need to see, here's what we need to see. And they kept saying, oh, we're working on it, without showing anything.
Right.
And it's there's no transparency, and there continues not to be. And yeah, so it's and I'm sure a lot of organizations are going through something similar, where a membership knows what they want, and the people up top are still not working on their fragilities of various identities, and things are exploding, or imploding is probably a better word.
Both, and
yeah,
and thank goodness, right? Historically, we have had people banging down the door saying this isn't good, this isn't inclusive, this isn't working, and they've said this, we're working on it, or we're not working on it, or your request doesn't represent the the majority opinion of membership, and therefore ... and so nothing changes. And so now people are walking away People are saying, okay, well, we're not as married to the existence of this organization as we are to, what is needed to be said. And you are an expert in this area, and but I feel like that is largely, because people who embody white experiences are also holding organizations accountable and not leaving it up to, people of color, Black people in marginalized identities to, hold that line and say, we're the only ones who are going to speak up for this. And because that's happening, organizations are being held to account. Is that a fair assessment or no?
It's the thought I had with you saying that is, yes, more white people are taking responsibility for whiteness and learning the language around whiteness. And a lot of people are using this language of liberation in white supremacist and patriarchal ways. And what I mean by that is, when I like the Big Venn diagram of all these isms is domination.
Yes.
And so what do people do when they first discover racism exists and that they're a part of that system? They attack people. Go on the internet and argue with their uncle and come at people in the comment sections. And you see these couple hundred comment threads on various posts of people trying to one up each other and have a woke off with one another about who's read the most essays and things like that. Then that's not my idea of liberation. That's just people reifying domination, but with the language of liberation.
Right.
And people do it in relationship with other people as well. They're like, well, I learned this language around abuse. I learned this language around trauma, and I'm going to throw it at you, as a form of power for myself, which is understandable. When people don't feel empowered, they grab whatever weapons they have. And it holds back all the progress because it's about white people. It's about people who already have various privileges using, grab. And I'm speaking about this in the them way, but I've done all these things. I've been on that same path. And so, yes, more white people are talking to the powers that be, and trying to stand along with, our siblings of various marginalized and historically oppressed identities.
Excluded, right?
Yeah. And I also don't really believe change happens until the people are in the seats of power. I mean, I've worked.
Oh, for sure. Yes. 100%. Yes.
Because power is good at keeping it. Privilege is good at keeping it. And even, just the various workplaces I've been in, I can have all the language. I can do my workshops. I can do my things. But when I have a boss and coworkers who don't give a fuck, it's there's a certain point where I just feel stupid, that I just feel like I'm the problem.
Yes.
And that's literally what happened in my last job, which, pushed me into starting my own practice again, which has gone great. So it is what it is. But I fought the good fight, and maybe some seeds were planted. I don't know.
Right. Well, but okay. So I'm going to ask you a question about that, because I actually did have a conversation this recently about at what point do you stop being the only voice in the room in a massive organization that is saying these things, and do you say, okay, I have fought the good fight, I have done my part, and no one's paying attention, and I can't make a difference here, so I'm going to go over here and try to do something. I feel like there's a lot of what I hear and what I have struggled with historically in numerous organizations, is that sort of well, this is just the way it is, and why can't you get on board? Right? What is wrong with you that you are constantly trying to make trouble here? Right?
Oh yeah. I mean, and there's a term, white solidarity. And basically when you break out of white solidarity, when you start questioning things, you get punished.
Yes.
And I've experienced that in a couple different organizations where I've been asked to leave, or I've had in my master's, I stopped being allowed to teach. I was told just teach guitar, because I was talking about racism in music therapy, and just teach guitar, Daniel. Or I talked about a Jewish experience thing and a student complained and they didn't have a conversation with me about, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm salty. Master's was messed up. But except for the certificate program I did.
Well, was the certificate program part of the same?
No, it's different.
Okay, so
part
totally
of the school.
different, but it was
different.
The same school.
Same school, yeah, on still Colorado State University. I'll just drop names, but the music therapy department, very well known, does things very well in their specific way, and it's very white. And so me being Jewy wasn't white enough for them. Me being direct, me being emotional, me talking about challenges in the field, me doing stuff outside of the like nice and cute and don't cause conflict didn't work for them. And a lot of things, and the biggest heartbreak for me in all these different areas are the white value of conflict avoidance, where people would rather let relationships die. They'd rather have people get fired than to just say, hey, we're having a problem. We'd like to talk to you about it, like early on, instead of at the end of the road when like, and we can't tolerate this anymore. It's like, I had this meeting with this director of the musical where he's like, yeah, we've had a bunch of complaints about you. I'm like, since when? He's like, 12 months ago.
That's just bad. That's bad leadership.
It is bad leadership, but when the consequence was, and you're not teaching anymore, it's like, okay. Anyway, that's a story for another day. But conflict avoidance, actually, so in the whiteness groups that I've led, and I'm doing 2 right now, we read a book called, and I'll get back to your question in a second when I finish this up, but there's this book, White Supremacy and Me, by Layla Saad. That's this awesome book that I recommend for everyone. Quick little chapters, 28 days of like one a day with the journaling prompts about various aspects of white supremacy, about how it affects people, how we're engaging other people, things like that. Highly recommend it. And it's great as a book club book too, because it gives you all the stuff. So we do that book. People are learning about white supremacy, about whiteness, about internalized stuff. Great. But I also tell people, actually, I think I have the book over here. Here it is.
I just put it in the comments.
Oh, good. Oh, it's either Me and White Supremacy or White Supremacy and Me. I always mix it up. But then the other book is We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Marie Brown. And it's about transformative justice. And it's a little tiny book. And we do these in tandem because I tell people it doesn't matter how woke you are. It doesn't matter how much language of liberation you have if you won't engage in conflict. Either you talking to people in a way that is conflicting, or being able to hear people bringing challenges to you. If we can't do either of those, which are skills that white people have extremely little stamina for, especially white Christian people, but not white Jews and other white non-Christian folk, having extremely little stamina for conflict means it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how woke you are. It doesn't matter how much language you have. If you immediately start crying or you can't be in these spaces or you can't talk to leadership, it just doesn't matter. Because the individual aspect of all this stuff is important, but it's not the point. The structural stuff is the point.
Right. It's fascinating because I as a therapist in practice, I see so much anxiety, like fully shut down anxiety from white people who are so afraid to do or say anything because they're afraid that they will say something that someone feels the need to correct, or they will, hurt someone's feelings, or, and obviously we don't want to do that, right? We're not seeking to cause harm, but they're so terrified of any kind of conflict or any kind of, having to then take accountability for something they've said, that they fully shut down and stop and stop being in those spaces at all.
Yeah. And that comes from these values of this lack of stamina for conflict conflict period, lack of stamina for any engagement in race. Like even asking a white person say, I am white is a journey. And then the third one goes back to what I said earlier about the woke folk using the language of liberation in a domination way. If you're, I just remember this moment when I was in that certificate program, I wrote a paper on white supremacy and music therapy. And there was this paper I was, referencing, and I was like, well, what they got wrong is A, B, and C. And my professor said, don't do it like that. That's not feminist. Like, say, here's what they found, and here's what I'd like to add to that, or the questions I have. Like, you don't have to dominate. You don't have to have this violent approach to like, well, I'm better and they're worse. And it's like, it blew my mind because I'm like, yeah, that's how I've been taught all these things, both in a world way, but also in a, like that we have to like put people down in order to be up. And so when so much of that, you know, internet kind of culture, I mean, so many professions now have these, you know, Facebook groups up for the profession where it's like the people who don't know it enough yet and the woke folks who will tear them apart.
And they're right, exactly. And where's the middle? Right.
That's not a community.
No.
And it comes from a place of being better than thou. And I'm like, that's not my idea of liberation. That's the phrase I've learned to use instead of, I don't think that's right. It's like, that's just it. It's not my idea of liberation. People are welcome to disagree with me. And I'm happy to, and there are, of course, moments where that form of communication is meaningful, but like, again, authenticity and community, the way we have conversations with people about change, about growth, don't really happen on a message board. Very few people see a comment that's aggressively spoken towards them and say, I've learned something today and I'm going to think harder. You know, you know, when, and this comes up a lot in the whiteness groups. It's like, well, I have this uncle, well, I have this coworker, well, I have this, you know, how do I handle this? And there's a certain piece of me that just thinks like, it's kind of like hustling for a business. If you like if you do a talk and they're not interested, I'll give them like one more check-in.
Right.
If they're still not interested, I'm not going to waste email time trying to get them to like buy my services. So same with proselytizing the good word of liberation. If people aren't there yet, they're not there yet. You're not going to force a square peg through a circular hole. If anything, you're going to make them get even further the other way, which is what we see when people attack people on the internet. The people who maybe had something to learn end up just thinking, oh, fuck these people, instead of, and then the other piece I bring into mind is knowing the difference in your body between I am offended by this versus someone could be offended by this. Right. Because that's an important difference. And a lot of people treat someone could be offended by this as I am actively hurt. And it's important to, it's like, again, it's authenticity. It's, and like even you use the word harm. And there's a lot of these words like harm, gaslighting, what's the one? Tone policing, like these words that are used binarily. Like it's like either it is or it isn't. It's 100%. How dare you tone police me? And it's like, and people use that as this get out of jail free card for being cruel. Right. And there's a difference between like, I'm understandably upset in a racialized way based on an environment I'm in, and I'm expressing myself in a way that doesn't fit within white standards of conflict. Right. There's that. And there's, I'm yelling at people on the internet as a white person who's learned about woke shit. You know, how dare you tone, like those are not equal, you know? And so like saying someone's being tone police anyway. So and harm, people are using harm left and right. Like everything is harmful. And it's like, I had a situation like a month or two ago in one of those improv things where this white guy said to me, he's like, oh, I'm a Swedish Jew. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, tell me about your lineage. He's like, oh, I'm not actually Jewish. It's just in my small town, my dad like worked for the bank and like we were just good with money stuff. So people called us Jewish. And I was just like just no sign that that's
nothing, just not even aware.
But then I kind of checked in with myself. I'm like, I'm not hurt. Like, that's stupid.
He doesn't know any better.
I'm like, I don't feel like this person's coming after me as a Jew. I just think that's a very uneducated thing to say. And I don't feel like educating him right now. But I had to like look in because I realized I felt like I was supposed to be so offended. Right. And a big piece of authenticity, going back to that, is figuring out the difference between what I feel and what I feel like I'm supposed to feel.
Yes.
You know, like even with my makeup journey, like I've had to figure out, because, you know, with a lot of the journeys of identity, we overcorrect. So at first I was wearing a ton of makeup all the time and I felt like I wasn't queer enough unless I was super femme. And then I was like, I still find love in masculine aspects of myself. And I'm not a trans woman. Like, I'm not trying to be a woman. I don't need to be constantly like presenting in these ways. And it was about my discomfort with my masculinity. It wasn't about who I desired to be, but about who I desired not to be. And so, and part of non-binariness is like, everything's an option. Everything is possible. And figuring out, what do I actually desire? Do I want to wear makeup tonight? Do I want to wear heels? Or am I doing that because I feel like I need to perform my gender identity for people? Right. Which gender is performance. Like, that's a fine option too. But, but
we get to make that decision for ourselves in the moment based on what we're experiencing, not based on what we, you know, are trying to necessarily, you know, communicate.
Yeah. And being able to honestly answer the question, what do I want, is hard. It's a very hard question to answer.
It is a very hard question. It is an almost impossible question for many people to answer.
Uh-huh.
You know, even, like in a one-on-one situation where I'm there in this very intimate space with a person who shared everything, with me. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want? And they're like, I mean, this is an option, and this is an option, and this is an option, and and I should want this, and I should want that, and I should, we live in a world of where everyone's shooting all over themselves all the time.
Don't shit on me.
So I really appreciate this, Daniel, because I do think that this is such a nuanced conversation that you are centering so beautifully in through the lens of a therapist, of an emotionally aware, conscious, evolving person, right? Not as performance. And again, performance is important, like showing and setting an example on some level for like the world we want to live in. There's value in that, right? But if that's the sum total of your experience, then authenticity doesn't necessarily isn't centered there.
Yeah. The other big mantra I've used for the last couple months, actually I even did a needle point of it, is whatever you do it on purpose.
Yes.
And I have a little
do it on purpose. I love that.
Because that's the thing. Everything's fine. Right. Everything's fine with consent.
Do it. Exactly.
Everything's fine. And so like if you want to play around with gender, like even I was thinking I might have a birthday coming up, and I was thinking of having like a costume theme, but I'm trying to figure out a simple way to say it. But basically, what's a gendered expression that you've always wanted to do and never have? Come as that. Is that wearing dangly earrings? Is that dressing super masculine? Is that mixing and matching all these things? Do you just want to wear nail polish? Like whatever it is, and when I think of what I would do, I would actually dress super masculine because I've just never been, I like a button-up shirt and slacks, but like I've never worn like I was at a wedding recently, cis men. I was at a wedding recently, and there was this dude in like sports shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm like, who told you this was like
at a wedding?
At a wedding, like I was just like, cis men can get away with anything because the bar is so low, and so I kind of want to do that because I've never allowed myself to, want to wear like sweatpants and like a hoodie, except it's summer, but like not shower, like let my facial hair grow out a little bit, even though it's patchy and gross,
So just do whatever outside of what the shoulds are.
Yeah, and just like it's a gendered expression,
Right.
Even something I learned is that facial hair is male contouring. Like
it's so true.
And you see like when they do the little chin strap, it's just contouring.
Yep. Right. It's just I wish I could hide my double chin in that way.
Yeah, and or even like breast augmentation and like all these surgeries people do without gender, that's all gender expression.
Yes.
That's all gender affirmation. I want larger or smaller A, B, and C because I want to feel more in my gendered expression. Like it's the same thing, It's just, simultaneously more accepted and more frowned upon.
Yes, because that's the cis woman experience of the world that we are blind. Right. We are not, we're not okay. And no matter what we do, it's wrong.
Seeking beauty is wrong, and having beauty is wrong. Yeah.
Right. And not seeking beauty is also wrong.
Yeah.
And not having beauty is also wrong.
Yeah. Beauty, actually, that's one. I had a friend recently. So I have a therapist friend who is beautiful, and we like went out and got dinner, and we were talking about ourself, I was talking about feeling beautiful. And I said, what's your journey of feeling beautiful? And she was like, I'm sick of it. She's like, I go through the world in this way that my beauty is seen before any aspect of who I am. And and as a poly person, she's like, all my girlfriends think I'm trying to steal their husband. All these people think I'm trying to fuck them. People automatically assume I'm mean. People automatically assume all these things about me. And she's like, I wouldn't wear nice clothes. I wouldn't wear makeup for years because I didn't want to enhance anything. I didn't want to be seen. But she's like made it in her journey enough that she actually compared it to men taking responsibility for patriarchy, that she as a woman taking responsibility for her beauty, that she's like, I can ignore it and just let things happen. But I find when I take responsibility and actually like navigate spaces and like set up like boundaries for various things around that, less hurt is done for multiple people. Mm-hmm. And it was really fascinating. And I did like a little writing exercise after that conversation called like, I rebuke thee beauty. And we talk a lot about fat phobia. We talk a lot about things like that. But the other end of that spectrum is how are we still, even if we're like breaking out of certain bodies being ugly or certain bodies being acceptable, are we also questioning the other side of the spectrum of, is beauty something that we need to also renegotiate as being like inherently better?
Oh, yes.
Because
yes.
What's that mean? What's that look like? You know? So I also want to get back to your question earlier about like, when is it time to say goodbye to an organization that isn't listening? And to me, so something with me, I try and break out a binary thought with everything, because everything's a spectrum, which of course is a binary statement, which is funny, but everything's a spectrum except for very specific things. And so just one of those spectra is investing your time, energy, and effort into the growth and change of an organization. That you can be, these famously badass people who fought hard. Like I think of Angela Davis, who like went to jail, and like, because she was just like, yeah, I am part of the Communist Party. And like, yeah, I am speaking out about these things. And I work at this university, and just like did not let up. But of course, for every one story of someone like Angela Davis, how many stories are there of people who had their careers ended, who had their lives ended, who had lost family, who lost friends, and we don't hear about them. Right. So you can choose to go hard until the end. And maybe you'll be successful. Maybe it'll be worth it. Or you can also, on the other side of the spectrum, say, no, I'm not touching that. And then somewhere in the middle is giving the energy you have and the time you have and going to the edge of your comfort zone +1 or +2 or +5, always, but not +200, where, you're burning out everything and just quitting caring. I do think some people give themselves a pass earlier than they should, because it's like, well, I gotta support my energy and I gotta stay within and it's like, yes. And if you're still I don't believe something is truly an act of allyship. Let me take away the word truly, because that's binary. I think the highest form of allyship, I think the highest form of this like intercultural tzedakah that we can do is when you're sticking your neck out. If you're not sticking your neck out, if you're not putting yourself personally in a position that damage can be done to you, your life, your career, if that's the highest form, where I could lose my job, where I could lose my standing with my coworkers, where I could lose my standing in this community because this is so important to me and I understand the stakes. I'm not saying it's not meaningful and if you don't do those things, because it's lovely if you don't have to do that. But the highest form is where like, it's not about, because that's what holds people back, is like, oh, well, I want to say something. Like the really, the super cliche example is, I stood up in a meeting and said, hey, I think this is white supremacist. I think this is messed up. Why are we treating this coworker this way? But all this stuff. And then someone messages me afterward, I really like what you said. Thanks for saying that. Right.
Yeah. It's like, well, why didn't you stand up and say it with me?
Yeah. It's like, that's not helpful. Your emotional support after the fact is an iota of what it would have meant to say, I agree with Daniel in the meeting. But they wouldn't stick their neck out. Yeah. So listeners, don't be that guy. Like if you agree with something brave that someone says in a meeting, stand up with them. Because you might help start a domino effect of good.
Yes. And at the very least, you let other people know that, they won't be alone when they, have something to say, right? Like we can't guarantee that there's a domino effect of good, right? We don't speak up because we assume that, it's gonna create ultimate change. We speak up because it's the authentic thing to do, right? Like, you hope that systems change. You hope that you are contributing to that. But ultimately, I just can't sit there and be silent when something is happening that I do not believe is right.
Exactly.
Right. And I not perfect. That we all know this. Anybody who spent any time with, I'm deeply imperfect. So I'm not in that space saying I'm doing it right all the time, because I'm certainly not. I'm sure I've fucked up 87 times in this conversation alone. But but what I want is for, in any situation, for people not to feel like they're alone. Right? Like, for anybody to feel like they have to sit there and, be othered or be, unseen in a space where they are bringing themselves completely. I mean, we work in, especially in the nonprofit and the mental health world, people literally set themselves on fire. Not literally, but they set themselves on fire to keep other people warm, right? They put so much of their own energy and time and care into doing the jobs that they do. And to have that be taken for granted, and to have their individual experiences, or my individual experience as a woman or a Jewish person, I can't tell you, Daniel, some of the shit that I heard working for a Jewish organization from within the leadership of the Jewish organization, that was so horrifyingly unpleasant and dismissive and sexist and so very, very sexist. And when I spoke up about it, if there was any response from leadership, it was, we're responding to this because we are trying to protect this organization. It's not for you. And that was directly quoted to me. We are not interested in protecting you as a woman who works in this space. We are responding to protect this organization, which the unspoken end of that statement was, from you.
Yeah.
We are protecting the organization from you because we don't want you to sue us.
Yeah. That's the thing, is because of the litigiousness of especially systems of whiteness in the United States, these things are treated as, instead of what's the ethical thing to do, it's like, what's going to keep us from getting in trouble in a way that will make us lose money or have to spend money.
Right.
And that, I mean, even I mentioned briefly the bullshit in my master's, like I ended up being treated as a litigious issue instead of as a person. And it's deeply dehumanizing. So I empathize.
Right. And it was totally, I mean, things were happening in front of other people and no one was saying anything. And I was standing there by myself trying to advocate for myself. And it was like, you're entirely alone in this. And because you're trying to do it graciously, because you're in a really terrible position, and you have a smile on your face, it must mean that you're okay with what's happening.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. And it's the experience of, thousands or millions of people every day.
Right.
And the thing is, like, we still speak in this place of privilege as white folks where, the white Jewishness is interesting.
Yes.
How we fit and how we don't fit. Actually, Shoshana Schechter, I don't know if she's changed her name since she got remarried, but she said one of my favorite lines about Jewish whiteness, where she said, we get white privilege until we open our mouths.
Right.
Because there's this great image of the iceberg of culture where it's like, above the water is dance, dress, food, holidays, celebrations, like these things we think of when you can think of like culture A, culture B, culture C, you can name those things. And whenever I do a presentation, I'll say, can you name a Jewish food? Matzo ball soup. Like, can you name a Jewish holiday? Hanukkah. All right. And then we get below and so it's like way more content below the water. And it's things like hierarchy, family setups, how we raise children, death practice, conflict resolution, like all these things that are cultural, but are invisible. Mm-hmm. And so I ask people like, what do you know about Jewish family structure? How do you know about how Jews treat their elders? How do you know about Jewish conflict resolution? Because we are more direct than white Christian people. We are more engaging in conflict and much more resolving of conflict because we go into it, you know. And the problem is when systems of whiteness and white Christianity and white Christian patriarchal cis het all that stuff become invisible and unmarked. It means that's the baseline by which everything else is compared. Yeah. And so so when we say that, for instance, the one I heard recently from a friend who was doing an internship, her supervisor said something along the lines of, yeah, we tend to have problems with Jews when it comes to boundaries. And that made me really upset because, yeah, Jews are more direct, more communicative. In systems of white Christianity where you're just supposed to keep your mouth shut, of course we seem loud. Of course we seem direct. Of course we seem these various things. And so whenever we think of a culture as having more of a quality or less of a quality, or more practice of a verb or less practice of a verb, it's the hidden part is in comparison to the baseline of white Christian supremacy. Even what I think about a lot, or we think about various cultures that age beautifully. And there's various terms and phrases for these various, you know, like racial groups that age beautifully. But I realize I'm like, it seems like most racial groups age beautifully. It's white people who don't. Like, everyone's being compared to people who are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to aging beautifully. Right. So why is it that we're saying all of them age beautifully when really we just like, I want to say.
Right. We age less beautifully.
You know, but that just shows that even the baseline, even when it's low on the spectrum of people of the world, it's still the comparison.
Yes.
And so that goes into things like we're talking about with work, like, you know, really dangerous words that give me like goosebumps are fit, are professionalism, like these words that are used. Well, they're not very professional. It's like, what do you mean? And especially coming back to this podcast about ableism. When it comes to mental illness, I'm sorry. I keep telling so many stories, but I have another story about that.
I love stories. This is a place for stories.
I want to be careful not to take up too much space.
Please take up. You're here. Please take up all the space.
It's a gendered thing. As a person socialized as a man who's trying to break out of masculinity, I'm like, oh God, am I talking too much? I'm talking too much, aren't I?
No, I invited you here.
I guess. I guess I am a guest on the show. So was working for a large local nonprofit health organization. And I was part of an employee resource group around mental illness. And so they're like, oh, well, next month is Mental Health Awareness Month or something. So we're going to put out a calendar and each day has a little thing you can do. And they're like, here's last year's. And it's like, take a deep breath, drink a glass of water. And I'm just like, and I'm like, I think this is stupid. I'm like, well, that doesn't help me. Like and especially at that time, I was really, really struggling, you know, mid-pandemic, working through PTSD stuff from my master's. Like I was not healthy, you know, to the point, and maybe you've experienced this as well, but where you're a therapeutic professional talking to young people about therapeutic, like mental health skills. And you're like, do I do this? Am I sick enough to have this job? Or am I too sick to have this job? Which of course is a heartbreaking thing, but is something I thought a lot. And I'm in this meeting where they're supposed to be supporting mentally ill staff, and it's saying drink a glass of water. And so I'm like, who is this for? Which is the question we should ask. Who is this actually for?
Right.
Well, it's for everybody. I'm like, okay, if it's for everybody, it means it's for people who are already in positions of dominance. Right. People who already have class privilege, people who already have racial privilege, people who already have gender privilege. Like when you say it's for everybody, everybody means people in power. It never actually means everybody. So I'm like, and that's not the point of this group. Everybody is covered. We're not covered. You know, and basically they handed me off like 2 times to like their boss. Like this person handed me off to the person who oversees the ERGs. And that person put me in touch with the person who does this, that, and the other thing. And when I'm talking to this person saying, hey, I thought this was messed up, I don't think that's supportive, she's like, wow, this is great. I love how you're talking about this stuff. Can you talk to my staff? And I'm like, I mean, yeah, but what does it mean that you haven't sought this education for your staff, but me barking up the tree has led to you thinking that I'm competent and available? Mm-hmm. Needless to say, I didn't get the gig. But it's just like, but it was so interesting to me that the higher up I got, the more people were like, oh yeah, this is on our values and ethics thing. We should be doing this, shouldn't we? But on the ground, people were like, nah, that's a lot of work.
Right. Well, also, they've never, their bosses have never thought of it. So they never invited anyone else to think of it. And when you're starting on the ground with people in organizations that are often already overworked and under-resourced, and asking them to do that, if the organization is not, the culture of the organization is not supporting that, it's it's difficult to convince people that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, because you seem like a rabble rouser.
Right. You're just, can't we just get through this meeting, Daniel? Like, I got other shit to do. Like, why do you always come in here and tell us things that we're doing wrong? We just want to get through this. This calendar is not for anybody. It's a marketing tool. We don't actually have any intention of helping anyone with this. We just have to get in here and do it and move on to the next fucking thing. And
I will say, something that makes that whole thing just another level of heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Is when you're working in mental health and you're working with people who should know better.
Oh.
Like, and yes, everyone should know better, but like when it's like, I'm talking about mental health, I'm talking about supporting people, I'm talking about healthcare and like an equitable outcomes. And people are like, nah. Like I had this boss where I said, yeah, I'm feeling A, B, and C. And he goes, I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's, you're not, you're
do you think I'm lying to you? Like, I don't, I am an honest person, and that's very clear. And you're just saying, nah, I think you're lying to my face. I'm like, I sincerely don't know how to respond to that because that's so, and we had a good relationship up until then. That was like a huge surprise. And he was like, yeah, I don't think that's the case. I'm like, what do you think's the case? Like, I don't know what to say. Like, that was the beginning of the end.
That's a fascinating way to respond to when someone tells you how they're feeling.
I think you're lying about your feelings about the situation. It's like, you can say like, hey, it sounds like you're stressed as well. Like, let's navigate how much of these things are the responsibility of the organization to navigate and which things are from life. Okay, maybe we can have a conversation about that. But just saying, nah, that's not true. I didn't know what to do with that.
There's nothing you can do with it. And that's the point. That's why it's presented in that way, because there's a period at the end of that. We're done talking about this.
The cruelty is the point. That's the phrase I've heard before.
Yes. Yeah. Because if I just shut it down, then we won't have to keep having this conversation, because their hope is that you just walk away.
Yeah. I mean, even when I was telling him, I ended up doing a same day resignation with that job, which isn't generally my ethic, but like things had gotten so bad there and I was calling stuff out and they were just being violent, verbally violent, whatever, and so I had this meeting, like boss was like, I want to talk to you. I'm like, I'm not talking to you without an HR person present. And then we had that meeting and I basically gave him an opportunity. Like in my head, I'm like, if he takes responsibility for like this latest bullshit, I'll stay. And so I brought up all this stuff, the whole situation that had gone down, this HR person's listening in. And he, again, just is like, yeah, that's not mine. That's not my responsibility, whatever. And I said, okay, I quit. Like, I'm finding another job. I can't work here. He's like, well, you're, of course, welcome to, like, search for other positions. And this, I'm like, no, like, I am leaving today. I'm returning my equipment. I'm done. This is ridiculous. And then he got all sad. And I'm like, I'm not taking care of your feelings, bro. Like, and then he's like, okay, well, you got to return your equipment. So I'm here today. I'm like, I don't want to return it to you. Can I bring it somewhere else? He's like, well, no, you just kind of, and the HR person's like, Daniel, you can bring it to this place. I'm like, great. Thank you, HR person. Right. But like at every stage, he doesn't get any understanding. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to be going into this story time. That's not meaningful.
But that's the thing. Well, I think it's meaningful because it's probably not uncommon.
Sure.
For a person to have a challenge at work, to bring it up whether you are expressing, inherent systemic flaws, or you are expressing a difficult situation between you and a coworker, whether you are expressing, a challenge with a policy or the flexibility of your job. There are a million different ways in which, the and this is a whole nother issue, a whole nother podcast, but there are a million different ways in which, the baseline exploitation of labor that exists in our country says that you should be grateful to have this job. I am not responsible as your employer to take care of, or even be in the least bit concerned about your mental health, or about the relationships you have at work, or how this job, supports your general, way of being. You just need to show up and shut up and do your job and go back out into the world and deal with your shit by yourself, because this is not my problem. And what I think we are in this really beautiful moment where, the workforce is realizing the power that we have as individuals and collectively, and saying, we don't want to operate from that perspective anymore. And a job is just a job. This is, I have a teenage daughter who, has gotten her first, outside of like dog sitting and house sitting and, doing graphic design projects for me, job, like actual job out in the world. And having this conversation about, like, she's a high achiever, she's very, focused, wants to do a good job, wants to, brings her all to the situation. And obviously I want to empower her to be a conscientious worker and a focused person, and a good contributor to whatever work she does, right? Like that's valuable. And she would come to me in the beginning of this job and say, I need to take off this day, or my boss scheduled me for the wrong shift on a day that I said I, could work here and not here. And I feel really anxious, and I feel really, I feel bad because she owns a small business and she really struggles to get scheduling, and she's got all these teenagers working for her, blah, blah, blah. And I said, honey, this is an after school job. Okay. This is not your career. You have communicated what you could work, right? Yes. Have there been times where you were flexible in, how and when you showed up when you were able? Yes. Do you do the very best possible job that you can within, your capacity when you go to this job? Yes. Okay. Well, then it's your boss's job to be able to manage her business. You're not the manager. This is her business, not yours, my love. This is her business. And it's okay for you to ask for a day off. It's okay for you to occasionally call in sick if you are feeling so badly that you can't work. It is okay for you to be a person with a job. Mm-hmm. And this is the balance. You are not in charge of the other person's feelings about, you taking off, or you asserting your needs, or, and so this is like this constant conversation that we have to have about, like, what is expected of me in my role as a worker in the world, and what is reasonable for me to like give up of myself and my humanity to have the privilege of working in this ice cream store.
Yes. And the other thing I think of is, if someone is hiring vastly teenagers, they know what they're doing. There is inherent exploitation with any employee relationship. And that's basically what we agree to when we sign a contract is, you may exploit me for more than you pay me so I can have consistent hours and security in my work. Mm-hmm. And that's a fine agreement. That's a fine consensual agreement when it's actually consensual. And so, but when you're saying, and I only hire young people, like very young people, like that is just one more level of power dynamic that someone should be aware of. Mm-hmm. But power is very hard to see from the position of power. And so if someone's, I don't know, Yeah, so that's really great that you're teaching your daughter those skills and helping her realize that it's not your job to figure out your schedule for this person. Like, just communicate.
Are
And
you
again,
communicating?
are
Right.
you communicating?
But
Yeah.
also noticing the ways in which, I mean, this is and this veers off into another thing entirely, but there is, this is how we sort of teach the next generation to notice these power dynamics. And yes, there's a certain amount of exploitation that goes along with working for another person. And, I was raised that you never take a day off, you never call in sick, you never say no, you never say I don't know how to do that, or I can't, or that's not within my scope of responsibility, or no thank you, I don't want to do that. You don't say that. You do whatever is asked of you for as long as is asked of you, because that's what's expected of you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. That boomer work ethic.
Yes.
And that model doesn't work anymore.
No.
With the great resignation of this past couple of years, which wasn't just COVID, it was people realizing working from home and doing all this stuff. It's like, oh, and businesses just like, I think of Barnes and Noble as a great example of an organization that got creative to stay in business. The book business wasn't enough, so they got cafes, so they got music sections, so they got kids sections, so they got toys, so they grew, and there's the only old bookstore still around, Borders isn't around, and all these other things. And so just like we need to be innovative in the products we sell and the services we provide as business owners, it is essential in this day and age to be innovative in how we treat our staff. And just saying PTO or benefit packages or a billiards room isn't enough.
I don't want to play billiards at work.
No, beer on Friday, it's cute, but
thank you.
How do we actually treat people in a way that makes them feel human? How do we compensate people in a way that is doable for the business and meaningful for the individual? I remember with my business in Richmond that I made the choice to pay people a bit less annually to give them more perks. So they got more, so I paid for every month they could give me a receipt for up to $40 if you're a part-time, or up to $80 if you're full-time, for something you did for self-care. I don't care what it is. I remember one time someone went on a date with their boyfriend. Someone bought a bunch of succulents for their apartment. Someone got a tattoo, and I helped pay for all of them, because that, and then paying for them to go to these conferences and stuff. And but also taking them out to eat, when we're having a lunch meeting, just being oh yeah, I got it. Just these little things that say I got your back and I care about your life and not just the ability to make money for my company.
Yes.
And that's where that DEI stuff comes in, the equity work and the equity boards and stuff, is that a lot of them get stuck on the letter D, diversity. That it's simply, we need more colors of faces in the room, in the catalog. And that's stupid. It's not.
We
stupid.
need to,
representation is meaningful.
Of course, but we need to look like we're doing the work.
Exactly. Look like it.
It's a presentation. It's a performance.
When, that's not fooling anybody. Anyone, I don't think there's anyone who looks at a catalog and sees people who, if you're looking at some, Catholic university catalog and every picture has 3 people of color in it, I don't think any person who identifies with those people would say oh, therefore I bet this campus has clearly a 20%, or 40 or 60% amount of people of color on this campus. It's who's it fooling? And I saw a tweet one time that it's and if you're that kid, or if you're that adult who's in those catalogs as the person of color in all those pages, you should get a full ride scholarship. And I agree with that. Totally. Yeah. So.
All right. I literally, Daniel, I could talk to you all day long. What do you want to leave us with of all of your wisdom?
The things that came up in the conversation that I'd love for people to think about. One is figuring out the difference between what you actually want and what you feel like you're supposed to want. Whether that's what you put on your body, whether that's the work you're doing, whether that's the relationships you have in your life, whether that's how you approach sex and sexuality and intimacy. And I want you to approach life on purpose. That like, it doesn't matter if you want to break up with your partner and like have a slut phase for 6 months, go for it. Do it on purpose though. Don't do that as like filling a hole in yourself that you don't recognize you're feeling. Do it on purpose. If you want to quit your job, if you want to start a business, like just do it on purpose. Don't do anything out of like running away from something. Do it because it's what you want. Those are the things I think of from the conversation that I'd love for people to think about.
I love it. Thank you so much for spending some time with me on a Saturday morning. And do you have a place where people can talk to you or find you or reach out to you for more?
Yeah, I mean, I have my website for my business, which is Etude LLC, ETUDELLC.com, where you can find information about my business, how to contact me, stuff like that. And then I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm Daniel Go 88. Twitter, I believe I'm Daniel NNZ. Let me double check that. Which is my Hebrew name, fun fact, Daniel Nilsen Natazarach. So Daniel NNZ as in Nancy Zachary for Twitter. Yeah, those are the things I think of.
Awesome. I'm telling people how to find you. Daniel Go on Insta.
Daniel Go 88.
Of course. I just messed that one up. Hoot hoot. All right, y'all. We are back. We have quite a few really fascinating emergency coffee and conversation episodes coming up. Actually, I'm going to have 2 conversations on Friday. One with nurse Tamisha Finley, the other with psychologist, therapist, and beloved member of the If You Could See Me family, Pamela Lynn Hoke, talking about some of the I don't know if it's unintended consequences, but unconsidered or uncared about consequences of the overturning of Roe and how that is impacting various different parts of our community. We're going to continue having these conversations so that we have a full and complete picture of what the world is going to look like and why we need to keep showing up and fighting the fight and being loud and obnoxious whenever possible. I will also be joined in the near future by Kevin Allison, the founder of Risk and the Risk podcast and the Risk storytelling series, which I'm very excited about. And I am the worst. Absolute. Hold on, y'all. Wait a second. Thank you, Daniel, for being patient. I'm keeping you over time, but sometimes you have people on the podcast who you've never met before. And so you have to look up their names. Britton McPhill will be my next Saturday morning coffee and conversation on Saturday, August 13th. Britton is a drama therapist in Connecticut, and I am super excited to talk to them as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. Daniel, I love you. I respect you. I appreciate you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.